With Hearthstone cards becoming real World of Warcraft abilities, rotations becoming more basic than the crowd at an Imagine Dragons concert, and more buffs and nerfs than you can wrap your head around, patch 11.1 is really going to shake up the meta, leaving us with the age-old question: what classes are going to be the easiest to climb on? So, today we'll be covering just that with yet another tier list about the difficulty of each range spec, allowing you to shoot for that elite set as soon as possible. And if you want to rank up fast this season, we've got you covered with our epic game knowledge courses. Positioning, we make it easy, and of course, our class guides teach you how to master your spec. Skill Capped is #1 for a reason. We take difficult PvP concepts and break them down into simple, bite-sized videos, which we make alongside the best players in the game. Skill Cap members even get full access to the #1 UI for PvP, which now includes 2-in-1 support for PvE. Right out of the box, everything is already pre-configured, saving you hours of time from needing to set everything up. And best of all, it's for every single spec. Players just like you are using Skill Cap to reach new rating heights, and that's because we continue to offer a rank up guarantee where we promise you can gain at least 400 rating while using our service. So what are you waiting for? Visit skillcap.com today using the exclusive discount link below. For now, back to the video. To do this, we'll be checking each specialization against their skill floor, which for range generally means how difficult their rotation is to pull off, be it by either requiring you to decipher the Da Vinci Code as you chain your spells together like an arcane mage, or simply having to press pet attack on your keyboard and using kill command and barbed shot on occasion. We'll also be factoring in win conditions, because let's be honest, if you can just throw on some chainmail, mash buttons, and tank damage without worrying about crowd control, it's going to be a lot easier to play than those of us getting smacked around in our delicate silky wizard dresses. I mean robes. Kicking it off, the easiest class to climb with in Season 2 is, once again, Beast Mastery Hunter. Yes, Hunters are back with higher damage, an easier rotation, and somehow even more pets than before. This is thanks to the Pack Leader Hero Tree rework, which now unleashes extra pets every 30 seconds when you kill command, and these pets hit hard with no extra effort required. On top of that, Beast Mastery is getting straight up damage buffs to make up for the removal of Basilisk Collar, a talent that rewarded tunneling one target. While this might seem like a nerf in PvE and PvP, it actually makes swapping targets much easier, further simplifying the class. And it doesn't stop there. Freezing Trap, like most crowd controls in the game, no longer instantly breaks on damage. This means Beast Mastery Hunters no longer need to rely on Diamond Ice, freeing up a talent slot for extra crowd control, or maybe even the newly buffed Dire Beast Basilisk, which will now automatically cast when using Call of the Wild. All things considered, Beast Mastery is looking incredibly easy to play in Season 2, and we expect it to be a meta-defining spec in Solo Shuffle once again. So no surprises here, as Beast Mastery locks into the very easy tier. Moving on to Beast Mastery's little brother, Marksmanship Hunter, is also getting some major reworks in Season 2. The main factor of these reworks revolve around the ability to play without a pet while still holding on to those all-important benefits through their passive Eyes in the Sky. One of the most important pet abilities, Mortal Strike, will be attached to Aimed Shot, which should be easier to get off in 11.1, as you'll be triggering the streamlined cast time reduction from more sources. You'll also still have access to Intimidation and Roar of Sacrifice, so the only thing you're really missing is the Fortitude of the Bear Wall. But given that you no longer have to micromanage your pet as it dies to cleave damage, this is a huge quality of life buff that most Marksmanship Hunters will be happy to take. As for their damage, Marksmanship seems to be dealing significant amounts of it when left free into Cloth classes, although, as always, can be a victim of line of sight on certain maps where you can line easily like Blackrook Hold. Finally, Marks Hunters will also be benefiting from those traps not breaking as often, so making those riskier plays can pay off, although who needs them if you're one-shotting everyone from across the map? All in all, Marksmanship should be feeling a lot smoother to play than before, but with its damage not being as simple as Beast Mastery, it finds itself in the easy tier. Next up, we then have the Mages, starting with their most meta spec of Season 1, Frost. Now, Frost Mage had been doing some crazy damage in Season 1, with Icy Veins being a killer cooldown for finishing out games and dampening, with or without the need for crowd control. And with Season 2, this will be no different, as Frost Mages are not receiving that many changes, despite having a slight rework to their tree. The bottom line of these altercations is that Frostbolt and Ice Lance are going to be doing a bit less damage thanks to the change to the Wintertide talent. However, Frost Mages are also going to be gaining more passive damage as their Winter's Chill effect will no longer be consumed when using Fingers of Frost Ice Lances, leaving moments where the Mage can quite literally shatter you over and over for 8 seconds with only instants. Great. As for their PvP talents, all Mage specs are gaining an ability called Overpowered Barrier, which absorbs 100% more damage but reduces Barrier's duration to 5 seconds down from 25. Each spec gets their own little perk with these too, but sadly for Frost, it's on the weaker end, as it just sends out some AoE damage on yourself when it breaks. Overpowered Barrier could be a great tool going into this patch for Mage survivability, but with the dominance of weak auras, we think this may get countered pretty early on in the season by swapping off the Mage when they use it. Along with Overpowered Barrier, mages have also had their polymorph buff to not break whenever a gentle breeze rolls past it, which is fantastic as most mage damage abilities have some passive cleave, leading to much easier win conditions. Finally, their Frostfire hero talent tree no longer revolves around tracking 2 different stacking buffs to activate, and will instead proc when using Comet Storm and the affected Ice Lance after, making knowing when your procs are up a lot easier. Overall, Frost Mage has received some great quality of life changes and should feel a lot smoother to play when your procs aren't seemingly random and you aren't demolishing your own CC chains. Although saying that, it will be placed in the hard tier, as hunters are just so strong that you may be getting countered in a ton of your lobbies. Moving on, we have Arcane Mages, which received a slight rework as well, but like Frost, should remain fairly similar. The biggest change you'll face as Arcane is the rework to Ring of Fire, which, although affects all mage specs, hurts Arcane the most since it was often cast when locked on Arcane. However, with it now dealing 15% less damage and replacing Ring of Frost, it's likely to not see much use, leaving Arcane yet again with one relevant damage school. And if being nerfed on damage wasn't big enough, their defensives have also been hit with the removal of Temporal Shield, which hits Arcane stocks even harder now that Alter Time is affected by dampening. Although their Overpowered Barrier does give them an insane 3-second stealth and damage immunity after your next blink when it breaks, all in all, Arcane is still very, if not more difficult in Season 2 of The War Within. And for the final mage spec of Fire, which was also very difficult in Season 1, we're actually seeing some changes that may make it easier. These are mainly coming from Fire just dealing more damage, as previously its DPS was just so low that getting anything done outside your cooldowns was pretty much an impossible task. And as with the other 2 specs, Fire is receiving Overpowered Barrier as well, which this time reflects 60% damage taken, making it far more punishing to hit than Arcane or Frost. Although it will still be far squishier since you don't have those slows or sprints of the other 2 specs. In conclusion, since fire damage is getting buffed, which will allow you to score kills far easier, we're bumping it up to the hard category alongside Frost. It may not be as reliable, but it's definitely far more simple to pull off spamming instants than spamming Frostfire bolts. Following on from the recently reworked mages are Shadow Priests, who for once are actually staying exactly the same. I guess after 10 years, Blizzard are finally happy with the spec. So other than the 13% flat damage buff to a spec that was already dealing pretty solid sustained DPS regardless, along with a 25% increase on their Void Blast, Shadow should actually be a little bit easier to land kills with just through your spells dealing more pressure. Because of these factors, we were considering moving Shadow down to the moderate tier from hard. However, thanks to the buffs to its counters of Warriors and Windwalkers, we can see a world where Shadow still just gets relentlessly trained to the ground and interrupted into oblivion, as after all, it still has to cast most of its spells to be effective. In conclusion, for these predicted meta reasons alone, we're thinking Shadow's going to remain in the hard category. Up next are the Warlocks, who have just received one of the worst PvP talents known to man, Bloodstones. This talent converts your lay on hand style heal into a semi-bloodlust, but with 2 massive drawbacks. First, it only works on yourself, and second, you can only use it once per game. Safe to say, this won't impact gameplay at all because no one should be using it. As for the specs themselves, Affliction, which was previously in the moderate tier, is once again looking solid, but this isn't just because it's strong, it's because the playstyle has become much more manageable. In the past, tracking your dots perfectly across 3 targets was a nightmare, but now with a more single target focus, Affliction is far easier to play than before. And in Season 2, that isn't changing, with the Soul Harvester hero talent leading the charge. Expect to see those Haunt Shadowbolt combos flying out again, as this seemingly single target focused rot spec continues to perform. But what's really crazy is the 300% buff to drain life, which when combined with Soul Burn gives Warlocks a Hail Mary defensive play when all their other cooldowns have been used. On top of that, Affliction Warlocks are also getting a healing component added to Soul Rot, though it comes at the cost of its Drain Life Cleave effect, so don't worry, no more triple drain setups from the past. The extra sustain is great, but as with Shadow Priest, its biggest problem is still there. Windwalker Monks and Warriors, 2 of its hardest counters, are looking incredibly strong going into Season 2. Even with all these buffs though, Affliction is still going to remain in the moderate category. As for Demonology and Destruction, we're not expecting any major shifts in difficulty either. Destruction is getting a bunch of new talents, but they're basically nothing burgers. You might see the occasional Rift proc from Wither Ticks, but beyond that, you're not really going to notice anything different. Demonology, on the other hand, is getting a bit more core generation, which should make the spec feel smoother to play. You won't be hardcasting as much, thanks to Doom Eternal now having a 30% chance to give a core, and Demonic Calling getting buffed from a 10% to a 20% proc rate. These changes will make Demonology feel better, but they won't necessarily make the spec any easier. So at the end of the day, both Demonology and Destruction will be joining Affliction in the moderate category. Honestly, not much has changed for the Goth Wizards. Boomkins are seeing yet another massive rework to their general tree, yet somehow they still feel almost exactly the same as before. The biggest change is that Light of the Sun has been moved to the general tree, meaning you no longer have to waste a damage point just to get a 45-second kick. This makes the spec a bit better at shutting down enemy casters, which is always a welcome improvement. Another nice tweak is the repositioning of Feline Swiftness on the tree, making it more accessible. With this, Boomkins will be able to kite melee more consistently, as they will be essentially sprinting all game long while also removing snares when shifting forms. But while these changes improve mobility and utility, Boomkins are also taking a hit where it hurts the most. Cyclone is being nerfed from 6 seconds down to 5. This is a huge issue for Boomkins, as Cyclone is one of their primary tools for surviving and closing out kills alike. So with this nerf, they're not only less deadly, but also far more fragile. That being said, Boomkin is still putting out immense burst damage with its cooldowns and short incarnation, meaning you don't always have to play perfectly to get results. Plus, with melee rising in popularity, Boomkins are finding themselves in solid lobbies, as they synergize well with classes that push in aggressively to secure kills. This allows them to get off those all-important Cyclones and keep the tempo rolling in their favor. The playstyle is still heavily dependent on how often you can generate precognition and land CC, so while the spec has some quality of life buffs, the nerf to Cyclone balances them out. After testing things out, it looks like Boomkin will remain in the moderate difficulty category. Moving on to the Dragons now, there isn't much movement here, both specs are basically staying the same, with the only notable change being the removal of the cooldown from Sleepwalk. Devastation was previously placed in the easy category thanks to its incredibly strong 40% damage reduction wall and its simple rotation. Now it's looking even better with a flat 10% buff to all damage, making it even stronger than it was in Season 1. On top of that, the rise of melee is actually working in Devastation's favor. With its high mobility and multiple hover charges, it thrives against melee-heavy lobbies, allowing it to kite and dish out damage freely. Given that it's not only getting direct buffs but also benefiting from the current meta, we're thinking of moving Devastation into the very easy category, because at this point it's hard to justify putting it anywhere else. As for Augmentation, Devastation's red-headed stepchild, it still has its gimmicky one-shot potential with Breath of Eons, and now has slightly more consistent damage with the return of Close as Clutchmate's stat increase outside of raids. However, outside of these cheesy win conditions, Augmentation really struggles to close out games, simply because the spec isn't designed with PvP in mind. So despite its simple rotation, swifty one-shot, and strong defensives, Augmentation will be placed in the moderate tier, at least until it becomes clear how exactly you're supposed to carry as a support DPS without being reliant on a very obvious gimmick. And finally, we have Elemental Shaman. There are a few changes, but the overall playstyle is staying mostly the same. The biggest change for Elemental is to Primordial Wave, which has been redesigned. Instead of applying Flame Shock, it now deals high damage to all targets affected by Flame Shock instantly, while still generating a Lava Surge. This simplifies its use by quite a bit, but is a big nerf to the actual burst rotation itself. Defensively, Elemental will also be gaining an 80% buff to Healing Stream, making that global just a little bit more worthwhile pressing. And as always, someone at Blizzard is trying to force Lightning Shaman to work with the predictably dead-on-arrival talent of Storm Conduit, which will give CDR and reduced kicks on Lightning Bolt casts. Finally, in the most recent patch, Elemental Shaman's impact damage got buffed significantly while nerfing their RNG damage from Overload. In general, these changes won't drastically affect Elemental's difficulty, but they do make the spec feel smoother and slightly easier to play, as you won't have to manage your Flame Shock nearly as much when you burst. Altogether, Ellie will be staying in the moderate category. Want some shortcuts to gain rating fast next season? Our Knowing Your Enemy courses teach you exactly how to counter every opponent you'll ever face. These are like cheat codes for getting ahead of 95% of players in WoW, split up into easy-to-follow courses. Skillcapped is also the #1 place for how to master your class. Our class guides teach you each spec from the ground up, allowing you to deal gladiator-level damage with ease. Everything we offer is backed up by a rating gain guarantee. Yes, we actually promise you will gain rating while using our service. So if you want to get started, be sure to visit the exclusive discount link below. For now, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.